I never thought I would be the kind of person to call the police on a neighbor. But watching that middle-aged woman blast my two young children with ice-cold water from her garden hose while they played in our own front yard changed everything. My name is Ethan O'Connor, and I moved to the Pleasant Valley subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, about 8 months ago with my wife Jennifer and our kids, 6-year-old Mason and 4-year-old Lily. The neighborhood looked perfect when we toured it: manicured lawns, friendly neighbors waving from their driveways, and a community pool that the kids were excited about. What the realtor conveniently forgot to mention was that our homeowners association was run by a woman named Barbara Hutchins, who took her volunteer position more seriously than most people take actual paying jobs. I first met Barbara 3 days after we moved in. She showed up at our door at 7 in the morning with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in that distinctive way that somehow all difficult middle-aged women seem to favor, and she wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it like it was some kind of uniform. "Welcome to Pleasant Valley," she said, thrusting a thick binder into my hands. "I'm Barbara Hutchins, the HOA president. This is your copy of the community guidelines. I've highlighted the most important sections for you." I flipped through the binder, noting that about 70% of it was highlighted in yellow. "Wow, this is comprehensive," I said, trying to be polite. "We maintain very high standards here," Barbara said. "I noticed your garage door was left open last night." "That's a violation of Section 4.7. I'll let it slide this once since you're new, but please review page 23. I wanted to point out that we had been moving boxes in until 9 at night and probably forgot to close it, but something about Barbara's tone made me just nod and thank her for stopping by. Jennifer came to the door as Barbara was leaving and asked who that was. "The HOA president," I said. "I think we might have a problem." "Don't be dramatic," Jennifer laughed. "How bad can a homeowners association be?" Over the next few months, I discovered exactly how bad it could be. Barbara seemed to have nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. She left notes on our door about our trash cans being visible from the street 15 minutes past the designated time, about a small oil stain on our driveway that needed immediate attention, and about the type of flowers Jennifer had planted in our front garden not being on the approved list. Each violation came with a warning, then a fine if not corrected within 48 hours. We racked up $200 in fines in the first 2 months before I finally sat down and memorized that damn binder cover to cover. I started setting alarms on my phone to remind me to bring in the trash cans. Jennifer replaced her beautiful tulips with the boring approved varieties, and I pressure washed our driveway twice a month whether it needed it or not. But Barbara always found something. The problem was that she seemed to enforce the rules selectively. Our neighbor, 2 doors down, an older gentleman named Frank who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, had weeds growing in his front yard that were clearly visible. His mailbox was rusty and leaning slightly to the left. But I never saw a violation notice on his door. "Frank plays golf with Barbara's husband," Jennifer explained after talking to some of the other neighbors at the pool. "That's how it works here. If you're in Barbara's inner circle, the rules don't really apply to you." I tried to stay under the radar and just follow every rule to the letter, but it became exhausting. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering what Barbara would find wrong this time. Jennifer started joking that we should just sell the house and move, but we had sunk so much money into the down payment and closing costs that we couldn't afford to leave. Things escalated on a Saturday afternoon in late June. The temperature in Scottsdale was already pushing 105 degrees, and I had set up a small inflatable pool in our front yard for Mason and Lily. I had checked the HOA guidelines. Carefully inflatable pools were allowed in front yards as long as they were deflated and stored by sunset. There was nothing about not using them during the day. The kids were having a blast, running around in their swimsuits and splashing each other. I was sitting on our front porch with a beer, keeping an eye on them and enjoying the rare moment of relaxation. Jennifer had taken the afternoon to visit her sister in Phoenix, so it was just me and the kids. That's when Barbara appeared, Power walking down the sidewalk in her typical uniform of capri pants and that damn HOA polo shirt. She stopped in front of our house and stared at the pool for a long moment. "Can I help you, Barbara?" I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly. "That pool is creating a hazard," she said, pointing at it like it was a nuclear reactor about to melt down. "Water is splashing onto the sidewalk. Someone could slip." I looked at the sidewalk. There were a few small drops of water where the kids had run back and forth, nothing that wouldn't dry in about 30 seconds in this heat. "The kids are just playing. We'll clean up any water." "The pool needs to be moved to the backyard immediately," Barbara said, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting this violation." "Barbara, the rules say pools are allowed in the front yard as long as they're stored by sunset." I checked. "The rules also say that homeowners cannot create hazards or nuisances that affect other residents," she said, tapping on her phone screen. "This clearly qualifies." Mason and Lily had stopped playing and were watching this exchange with wide eyes. I could see they were confused and a little scared by this strange woman yelling at their dad. "Tell you what," I said, standing up and walking toward Barbara. "Let me get a towel and dry off the sidewalk. Would that solve the problem?" "The problem is your constant disregard for the community standards," Barbara said, her voice rising. "Ever since you moved in, you've been pushing boundaries and looking for loopholes. First it was the garage door, then the trash cans, then those unauthorized flowers, and now this." I felt my temper starting to flare but tried to keep it under control. "Barbara, we've paid every fine, corrected every violation, and we've been trying really hard to follow all the rules. The kids are just playing in their own front yard on a hot day." "This conversation is over," Barbara said. "You have 1 hour to move that pool, or you'll receive a $200 fine." She turned to walk away, and that's when Lily, who was only 4 and didn't understand why this mean lady was yelling at her daddy, picked up a small plastic cup and tossed a little bit of water in Barbara's direction. It was such a tiny amount that it didn't even reach her, landing on the grass about 2 feet away. Barbara spun around, her face turning red. "Did your child just throw water at me?" "Barbara, she's 4 years old. She didn't throw water at you, she was just playing. It didn't even get close to you." "This is assault," Barbara said, her voice shaking with what seemed like genuine rage. "I will not tolerate this behavior." "Are you serious right now?" I asked, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "You're claiming that a 4-year-old splashing in her own yard committed assault?" Barbara didn't answer. She just stormed off down the sidewalk, typing furiously on her phone. I shook my head and turned back to the kids, who both looked upset. "It's okay, guys," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's move the pool to the backyard, okay? You can keep playing there." It took about 15 minutes to drain some of the water, move the pool, and refill it with the hose in the back. Mason and Lily seemed to forget about the incident pretty quickly once they were playing again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Sure enough, 2 days later, I found a formal violation notice on our door along with a letter stating that our family's aggressive behavior was being reviewed by the HOA board. and that we might face additional penalties. There was also a note at the bottom in what I recognized as Barbara's handwriting: "Control your children." I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Jennifer, who called me immediately. "This is insane," she said. "Can she actually do this?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "Maybe I should go to the next HOA board meeting and try to talk to her rationally." "Ethan, I don't think rational conversation is something Barbara is capable of." Jennifer was probably right, but I didn't know what else to do. I went online and looked up the HOA bylaws, which were publicly posted on the community website. There was a clause about disputing violations, which required submitting a written statement to the board at least 1 week before the monthly meeting. I spent an hour crafting a polite, factual letter explaining that we had not violated any rules and requesting that the violation be dismissed. The board meeting was held the following Thursday evening at the community center. I showed up at 7, dressed in business casual, with my printed copies of the relevant HOA sections and my letter. There were about 15 other residents there, most of them older folks who seemed to be regulars. Barbara sat at the head table with 4 other board members, including her husband Richard, a balding man in his 60s who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. She called the meeting to order and launched into a long report about neighborhood statistics, compliance rates, and upcoming community events. When it came time for resident comments, I raised my hand. Barbara's expression soured when she saw me, but she couldn't really refuse to call on me with everyone watching. "Yes, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. I stood up and kept my voice calm and professional. "I submitted a dispute letter regarding a violation I received on Monday. I wanted to address it with the board because I believe there was a misunderstanding." "The board has reviewed your letter," Barbara said without even looking at any papers. "Your dispute is denied. The violation stands." "Can I ask what rule I violated?" I asked. "The inflatable pool was used during daylight hours and stored before sunset, which is in compliance with Section 8.12 of the guidelines." One of the other board members, a woman in her 70s named Margaret, leaned forward. "Barbara, I don't recall reviewing any dispute letter. When did we do that?" "I reviewed it on behalf of the board," Barbara said quickly. "It clearly lacked merit." "That's not how disputes are supposed to work," said another board member, a middle-aged man named Tom. "We're supposed to review them as a group and vote." "I don't appreciate my authority being questioned," Barbara said, her voice taking on an edge. "I've been president of this board for 6 years, and I think I know how to handle a simple violation dispute." "Barbara, let's just review the letter now," Margaret said gently. "It will only take a moment." I watched as Barbara's jaw clenched, but she couldn't argue without looking completely unreasonable. She pulled out my letter, which looked like it had been crumpled up and then smoothed out again, and passed it around to the other board members. They read it in silence. Tom looked at the guidelines on his tablet, cross-referencing the sections I had cited. After a few minutes, Margaret cleared her throat. "I don't see a violation here," she said. "The pool was used appropriately according to our rules. I move to dismiss this violation." "I second that," Tom said. Barbara's face was turning red again. "This isn't just about the pool. It's about a pattern of behavior and disrespect for community standards." "What pattern?" Tom asked, looking genuinely confused. I pulled up the O'Connor file before the meeting. They've corrected every violation they've received within the required time frame. Their compliance rate is actually higher than the neighborhood average. "They're constantly pushing boundaries and looking for loopholes," Barbara insisted. "Following the rules as written isn't looking for loopholes," Margaret said. "Barbara, I think you need to step back from this situation. You seem to have taken it personally." "I move to dismiss the violation," Tom said formally. "Second," said Margaret. "All in favor?" asked Tom. 3 hands went up, including Tom and Margaret. Richard raised his hand reluctantly, avoiding eye contact with his wife. Barbara was the only one who didn't vote. "Motion passes," Tom said. "Mr. O'Connor, your violation is dismissed and the fine is waived. I apologize for the confusion." I thanked the board and sat down, feeling a small sense of victory. But when I glanced at Barbara, the look on her face made it clear that this wasn't over. If anything, I had just made things worse. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices for things that were increasingly petty. My car was parked 6 inches over the edge of our driveway onto the grass, $25 fine. Our house number plaque was faded and needed repainting, $50 fine. There was a small weed growing in the crack in our sidewalk, $25 fine. I documented everything, took photos with timestamps, and corrected each violation immediately. Jennifer started calling it the Barbara tax basically. We were paying about $100 a week in fines for things that other neighbors were doing without any consequences. "This is harassment," Jennifer said after I showed her the latest violation notice, this one claiming that our porch light was too bright and creating light pollution. "We need to do something." "Like what?" I asked. "She's technically following the rules, even if she's applying them selectively to us. There has to be something in the bylaws about harassment or abuse of power." We spent that evening going through the HOA bylaws again, and buried in Section 23, we found a clause about removing board members for misconduct. It required a petition signed by 30% of the homeowners and a special recall vote. We had about 200 homes in Pleasant Valley, which meant we needed signatures from at least 60 households. "That's a lot of people," I said doubtfully. "Let's just ask around," Jennifer suggested. "I bet we're not the only ones who have problems with Barbara." She was right. Over the next week, we talked to our neighbors and discovered that Barbara had a long history of targeting people she didn't like. A young couple 3 streets over had been fined repeatedly for having a car in their driveway that Barbara claimed was commercial because it had a small company logo on the door. The guy worked for a plumbing company, and it was just his work vehicle, but Barbara insisted it violated the rules about running businesses from home. Another family had been harassed for months because their teenage son sometimes practiced skateboarding in their driveway, which Barbara claimed violated noise ordinances. She had even called the police on the kid twice, though the cops had basically told her it wasn't illegal to skateboard on your own property. Within 5 days, we had 73 signatures. People were more than willing to sign once they heard we were trying to remove Barbara from the board. I submitted the petition to the HOA management company that handled our paperwork and requested a special meeting. That's when things got really ugly. The following Saturday, I was in the front yard with Mason and Lily again. It was another scorching afternoon, and the kids were playing with some chalk on our driveway, drawing colorful pictures and giggling. I was watering our flower beds, using the approved flowers that Jennifer had planted after Barbara's first violation notice about the tulips. I heard footsteps and looked up to see Barbara marching toward our house, and I could tell immediately that she was furious. Her face was flushed, and she was gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles were white. "You think you can undermine me?" she practically shouted as she reached our driveway. "You think you can turn this neighborhood against me? Barbara, I don't want to have this conversation in front of my kids," I said, setting down the hose. "If you want to talk, we can do it later." "No, we're going to talk now," she said. "I've dedicated 6 years of my life to this community. 6 years of making sure property values stay high and standards are maintained. And you show up with your entitled attitude and think you can just destroy what I've built. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I just think the rules should be applied fairly to everyone. Fairly, Barbara laughed, but there was no humor in it. You have no idea what fair means. You have no idea how hard I work to keep people like you in line. Mason had stopped drawing and was staring at Barbara with wide, frightened eyes. Lily had moved closer to me and was holding onto my leg. Barbara, you're scaring my kids. Please leave. Your kids need to learn respect, Barbara said, just like you do. That's when I noticed she was holding her garden hose, which she must have been using in her own yard before coming over. I didn't think much of it at first, but then she raised it and pointed it directly at Mason and Lily. Maybe they need to cool off, she said, and before I could react, she squeezed the nozzle. A powerful jet of ice-cold water hit both kids directly in their faces and chests. They immediately started screaming and crying, and I lunged forward to get between them and Barbara. The water hit me next, soaking my shirt and face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, grabbing the hose and yanking it out of her hands. Barbara stumbled backward, looking shocked as if she hadn't expected me to fight back. Mason and Lily were both sobbing, soaked and shivering despite the heat. I scooped up Lily with one arm and grabbed Mason's hand with the other, pulling them toward the house. "You just assaulted my children," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Stay away from my family." "They needed to learn a lesson," Barbara said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "They needed to understand that actions have consequences." I got the kids inside and immediately called Jennifer, who was at work. "You need to come home right now," I said as soon as she answered. "What happened? Are the kids okay?" Barbara sprayed them with her hose. Like right in their faces, they're terrified. "She did what?" Jennifer's voice went up about 3 octaves. "I'm leaving right now. Call the police, Ethan, right now." I hadn't even thought about calling the police, but Jennifer was right. This wasn't just some HOA dispute anymore. Barbara had physically attacked our children. I got Mason and Lily changed into dry clothes, made them some hot chocolate to calm them down, and then called 911. The dispatcher took my information and said she was sending officers to our location. 2 patrol cars arrived about 15 minutes later, and I met the officers outside. They were both young guys, probably in their late 20s, and they listened carefully as I explained what had happened. "So this woman, your HOA president, sprayed your children with a hose?" one of them asked, taking notes. "Yes, officer. They were playing in our driveway, not even on her property, and she came over and deliberately sprayed them with cold water. They're 4 and 6 years old. And this was during an argument about HOA violations. We've been having ongoing disputes with her, yes, but that doesn't give her the right to physically assault my kids." The other officer nodded. "We'll need to talk to her. Which house is hers?" I pointed to Barbara's house, which was about 100 feet down the street. The officers walked over, and I watched from my driveway as they knocked on her door. Barbara answered, and I could see her gesturing animatedly as she talked to them. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes before the officers walked back to me. "She admits to spraying your children with water," the first officer said, "but she claims it was just water and that you're overreacting. She also says your children threw water at her first earlier this week." "That's a lie," I said. "Or, well, my 4-year-old splashed some water in her direction when they were playing, but it didn't even reach her, and Barbara wasn't on our property. Today, she came onto our property and deliberately sprayed water directly at their faces. I saw the whole thing." "Do you have any video of the incident?" I felt my heart sink. "No, I don't. I wasn't expecting her to do something like this." The officers exchanged a glance. Mr. O'Connor, here's the situation. Technically, spraying someone with water could be considered assault under Arizona law. However, it's a relatively minor incident, and without video evidence or independent witnesses, it becomes a he said, she said situation. So you're not going to arrest her. We can write up a report, the second officer said. And you're welcome to press charges if you want. But I'm going to be honest with you, the county attorney probably won't pursue a case like this unless you have stronger evidence, or unless this becomes part of a pattern of harassment. It is a pattern of harassment, I said. She's been targeting my family for months. I have documentation of all the frivolous violations, the fines, everything. That's more of a civil matter, the first officer said. HOA disputes typically aren't criminal unless someone does something really serious. But what happened today, if you want to press charges, we'll support that. We'll file the report and document her admission that she sprayed your kids. Yes, I said immediately. I want to press charges. The officers went back to Barbara's house, and this time when they came back, they told me she had been informed that I was pressing assault charges and that she might be contacted by detectives. They gave me a case number and told me someone from the department would follow up within a few days. Jennifer arrived home about 20 minutes after the police left, and she immediately went to check on the kids. They had calmed down by then, distracted by cartoons and hot chocolate, but Lily started crying again when she saw her mom. That mean lady sprayed us with the hose, she sobbed. It was cold and it hurt. Jennifer held both kids close, and I could see tears streaming down her face. I know, baby. I'm so sorry that happened, but you're safe now, okay? Daddy and I won't let her hurt you again. After we put the kids to bed that night, Jennifer and I stayed up talking about what to do next. I had never felt so angry and helpless at the same time. Some crazy HOA president had attacked our children, and the police basically said there wasn't much they could do about it. We need to get a restraining order, Jennifer said. Keep her away from the kids. I don't know if we can get one based on this incident alone, I said, but I'll call a lawyer first thing Monday morning. The next day was Sunday, and I spent most of it documenting everything that had happened. I wrote out a detailed timeline of every interaction with Barbara, every violation notice, every fine, every confrontation. I compiled all my photos, all the violation notices, all my receipts for the fines we had paid. By the time I was done, I had a file folder 3 inches thick. Monday morning, I started calling lawyers. The first 3 I contacted didn't handle HOA disputes or restraining orders. The fourth one, a woman named Sarah Chen who had an office in Phoenix, said she could meet with me that afternoon. I took off work and drove the 30 minutes to her office. Sarah was in her 40s, professional and no nonsense, and she listened to my story without interrupting. When I was done, she flipped through my documentation and nodded. "You have a strong case for a restraining order," she said. "The assault on your children, combined with the documented pattern of harassment, should be enough. We can file for an order of protection, which is what Arizona calls restraining orders. Given that children are involved, I think we have a good chance of getting it approved." How does that process work? We file a petition with the court explaining the situation and requesting the order. There will be a hearing, usually within 10 days, where both you and Miss Hutchins can present your sides. If the judge agrees that there's a credible threat, they'll issue the order, which would prevent her from coming within a certain distance of you, your family, and your home. That sounds perfect, I said. What do I need to do? I'll draft the petition today, Sarah said. I'll need you to review it and sign it, and then we'll file it with the court tomorrow. Be prepared, this is going to escalate things. Miss Hutchins will probably be very angry when she's served with the petition." "I don't care," I said. "She crossed a line when she went after my kids." Sarah filed the petition on Tuesday morning, and according to Arizona law, Barbara had to be personally served with a copy. A process server went to her house on Wednesday afternoon and handed her the papers. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I heard about it later from my neighbor Frank. "She came outside screaming," he told me. "Said you were trying to ruin her life, that she was the victim, that you had turned the whole neighborhood against her. The process server just got in his car and left. I've never seen Barbara like that before." The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the Maricopa County Superior Court in Phoenix. Sarah prepared me for what to expect, explaining that I would need to testify about the incident and the pattern of harassment. Barbara would have a chance to defend herself, and then the judge would make a decision. The weekend before the hearing, I received a letter from the HOA management company informing me that Barbara had resigned as president of the board, effective immediately. The letter didn't give a reason, but I suspected it was because the recall petition had been gaining momentum and she wanted to quit before she was forced out. "Good," Jennifer said when I showed her the letter. "Maybe now we can actually live in peace." I wanted to believe that, but I knew this wasn't over. Barbara might have resigned from the HOA board, but she still lived in the neighborhood, and she clearly blamed me for everything that had happened to her. The hearing took place in a small courtroom with just a handful of people present. Sarah and I sat at one table, and Barbara sat at another with a lawyer she had apparently hired at the last minute. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Rodriguez, and she had a reputation for being fair but strict. Sarah presented our case first, walking through the timeline of harassment, and then focusing on the incident with the hose. I testified about what had happened, describing how Barbara had deliberately sprayed Mason and Lily and how terrified they had been. Sarah introduced photos of the kids soaking wet and crying that I had taken immediately after the incident, as well as all the documentation of the HOA violations and fines. When it was Barbara's turn, her lawyer tried to argue that the hose incident was just a momentary lapse in judgment during a heated argument, and that Barbara posed no ongoing threat to our family. Barbara herself testified, and I watched in disbelief as she tried to paint herself as the victim. "I've dedicated years to that community," she said, her voice trembling. "I've worked tirelessly to maintain property values and standards, and Mr. O'Connor came in and undermined everything I had built. He turned people against me, filed a petition to remove me from the board, and has been hostile and aggressive toward me from day one." "Miss Hutchins," Judge Rodriguez said, "did you or did you not spray Mr. O'Connor's children with a hose?" Barbara hesitated. "I did, Your Honor, but it was just water. I didn't hurt them." "They're 4 and 6 years old," the judge said, "and according to the police report, you admitted to doing this deliberately during an argument with their father. Do you understand that spraying someone with water without their consent can constitute assault under Arizona law?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," Barbara said. "I was upset. Mr. O'Connor had just filed a petition to have me removed from the board, and I reacted emotionally. It won't happen again." "You're right that it won't happen again," Judge Rodriguez said. "I'm granting the order of protection. Miss Hutchins, you are to stay at least 300 feet away from Mr. O'Connor, his wife, their children, and their home at all times. This order will remain in effect for 1 year, at which point Mr. O'Connor can petition to extend it if necessary. Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. Do you understand?" Barbara's face went pale. "Your Honor, I live in the same neighborhood." "How am I supposed to stay 300 feet away from their house?" That's your problem to solve, Miss Hutchins. Perhaps you should have considered that before you assaulted 2 young children. This hearing is concluded." Sarah and I walked out of the courthouse, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "She can't come near us," I said. "She can't harass us anymore." "The order is a tool," Sarah warned. "But you need to be vigilant. If she violates it even once, call the police immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." I drove home and told Jennifer the good news. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in months, I felt like we could actually relax in our own home. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. We didn't receive any violation notices. We didn't see Barbara patrolling the neighborhood. And the new interim HOA president, a retired accountant named David Morrison, was reasonable and professional. Mason and Lily gradually forgot about the scary lady with the hose and went back to playing in the yard without fear. But Barbara hadn't forgotten about us. About a month after the restraining order was granted, I came home from work to find Jennifer visibly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "Barbara left something on our doorstep," she said, showing me a manila envelope. "I didn't touch it. I thought maybe you should call the police first." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a printed letter, unsigned, that was filled with vile accusations and threats. It claimed that I was a terrible father, that I was corrupting the neighborhood, and that I would pay for what I had done. The language was disturbing and clearly meant to intimidate us. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. An officer came out, took the letter as evidence, and told us he would follow up with the detective handling the assault case. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Mike Torres from the Scottsdale Police Department. "Mr. O'Connor, we've been investigating your assault complaint against Barbara Hutchins. We've also received the threatening letter you reported. I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with Miss Hutchins." I met with Detective Torres at the police station and walked him through everything again. He took detailed notes and seemed to take the matter seriously. "Here's where we are," he said. "The assault charge for spraying your kids with the hose is borderline. Normally, we probably wouldn't pursue something like that criminally. But combined with the pattern of harassment you've documented, and now this threatening letter, we're looking at this as a stalking and harassment case. That's more serious." "Can you prove Barbara wrote the letter?" I asked. "We're working on that," Detective Torres said. "We've requested her phone and computer records to see if we can match the language or find a digital copy of the letter. We've also talked to some of your neighbors, and several of them have confirmed that Miss Hutchins has been making hostile statements about you and your family publicly. What happens next? We're building a case. If we can establish that she wrote the letter, or if she violates the restraining order, we'll arrest her. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. If she contacts you, if you see her near your house, anything at all, call us immediately." I left the police station feeling both hopeful and anxious. I wanted this to be over, but it seemed like Barbara was spiraling, and I had no idea what she might do next. The answer came 2 weeks later. I was at work when Jennifer called me, her voice panicked. "Ethan, you need to come home. Barbara is in our yard." "What? Call the police right now." I already did. "They're on their way, but she's just standing in our front yard staring at the house. It's terrifying." I told my boss I had an emergency and raced home. By the time I got there, 2 police cars were already parked on the street, and officers were talking to Barbara, who was standing on our lawn with her arms crossed. She looked defiant, almost daring them to do something. Jennifer and the kids were inside, watching from the window. I parked and approached one of the officers, who I recognized from the original hose incident. "Mr. O'Connor," he said, "we're placing Miss Hutchins under arrest for violating the order of protection. She was on your property in clear violation of the 300-foot restriction. I have a right to walk in my own neighborhood, Barbara was saying to the other officer. This is public property. Madam, this is Mr. O'Connor's front yard, which is private property. And even if you were on the sidewalk, you're required to stay 300 feet away. You're about 50 feet from his front door. They handcuffed her and put her in the back of one of the patrol cars. As they drove away, I saw Barbara staring at me through the window, her expression filled with pure hatred. Detective Torres called me the next day. Miss Hutchins has been charged with violating the order of protection. She's also being charged with stalking and harassment based on the threatening letter. We found a draft of it on her home computer. The county attorney is taking this seriously because of the escalating pattern of behavior. What does that mean for us? She's been released on bail with strict conditions. She's not allowed to come within 1,000 feet of your home or workplace now, and she has to wear an ankle monitor. If she violates the conditions even once, she goes straight back to jail. We're also recommending that the county attorney pursue the assault charges from the original hose incident as part of a larger harassment case. Over the next few months, the legal process ground forward. Barbara was formally charged with multiple counts: assault for the hose incident, stalking and harassment for the letter and the pattern of behavior, and violating an order of protection. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney was pushing for jail time given the involvement of young children and Barbara's complete lack of remorse. The case went to trial in early November. I had to testify again, this time in front of a jury, describing everything that had happened. Mason had to testify too, which broke my heart, but the prosecutor said it was important for the jury to hear from one of the victims. My 6-year-old son, wearing his best button-up shirt, sat in the witness stand and quietly described how the mean lady had sprayed him with cold water and how scared he had been. I watched 2 members of the jury wipe their eyes during Mason's testimony. Barbara sat at the defense table, her expression stony, showing no emotion at all. The trial lasted 3 days. Barbara's lawyer tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress, that she had devoted years to the HOA and felt betrayed when I filed the recall petition, and that her actions, while inappropriate, didn't rise to the level of criminal behavior. But the prosecutor systematically dismantled that argument, showing the jury the threatening letter, the police reports, the violation of the restraining order, and the testimony of multiple neighbors who described Barbara's increasingly erratic behavior. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Rodriguez, who had presided over the restraining order hearing and was now handling the criminal case, scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecutor asked for 18 months in jail followed by probation. Barbara's lawyer argued for probation only, claiming his client had already suffered enough by losing her position on the HOA board and becoming a pariah in her own neighborhood. Judge Rodriguez looked at Barbara for a long moment before speaking. "Miss Hutchins, I've reviewed everything about this case very carefully. What troubles me most is your complete lack of accountability. At no point during these proceedings have you shown any genuine remorse for your actions. You sprayed 2 young children with a hose in anger. You sent their father a threatening letter. You violated a court order by going onto their property. And throughout all of this, you've maintained that you're the victim." "Your Honor," Barbara started, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Parents have a fundamental right to feel safe in their own homes and to know that their children are protected from harassment and assault. You violated that right repeatedly and deliberately." The sentence of this court is 1 year in the Maricopa County Jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Upon your release, the order of protection will remain in effect for an additional 3 years. You will have no contact with the O'Connor family in any form. If you violate this order or your probation conditions, you will serve the remainder of your sentence, which I'm suspending an additional year. Do you understand? Barbara's face crumpled and she started crying. Your Honor, please, I can't go to jail. I'll lose everything. You should have thought of that before you attacked 2 children, Judge Rodriguez said. Bailiff, take her into custody. I watched as Barbara was led away, still crying and protesting. Part of me felt sorry for her. She had destroyed her own life through her obsession with control and her inability to let go of a grudge. But mostly, I just felt relief. It was finally over. Jennifer and I walked out of the courthouse holding hands. Sarah met us outside and congratulated us on the outcome. This is a strong sentence for these types of charges, she said. Judge Rodriguez clearly took this very seriously. With the restraining order extended and the probation conditions, Barbara won't be able to come near you for at least 4 years, possibly longer. Can we finally move on with our lives? Jennifer asked. Yes, Sarah said. You can finally move on. The neighborhood changed after Barbara went to jail. The new HOA board, led by David Morrison, instituted reforms to make the rules more reasonable and to ensure that enforcement was fair and consistent across all residents. The endless violation notices stopped. The petty fines disappeared. People started actually enjoying living in Pleasant Valley instead of walking on eggshells all the time. Frank, my neighbor, told me that Barbara's husband Richard had filed for divorce and put their house on the market. He told me he had no idea how bad she had gotten, Frank said. Said she had become obsessed with the HOA and with your family. I think he's embarrassed by the whole thing. Mason and Lily slowly recovered from the trauma of the hose incident. We did a few sessions with a child therapist just to make sure they processed everything in a healthy way. By Christmas, they were back to their normal, happy selves, playing in the yard without any fear. I never saw Barbara again after the sentencing. She served her full year in jail, apparently. She wasn't a model prisoner and didn't get any time reduced for good behavior. When she was released, she moved to a different city. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was living with her sister in Tucson and working some kind of retail job. The restraining order meant she couldn't come anywhere near Pleasant Valley without violating her probation. Jennifer and I talked about moving after everything that happened, but ultimately decided to stay. This was our home, and we had worked hard to afford it. We weren't going to let Barbara's crazy behavior drive us away. Plus, the neighborhood was actually pretty great once the HOA stopped being insane. David Morrison turned out to be exactly the kind of HOA president. A community needed someone who understood that the rules existed to maintain property values and safety, not to give someone a power trip. He instituted a formal appeals process for violations, required the board to vote on all fines over $50, and established clear guidelines for how rules would be enforced. About 6 months after Barbara was sentenced, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I figured if I was going to live in a community with an HOA, I might as well help make sure it functioned properly. My first motion as a board member was to establish anti-harassment and anti-retaliation policies to ensure that what happened to my family couldn't happen to anyone else. One evening about a year after the whole ordeal ended, I was sitting on my front porch watching Mason and Lily play. They had their inflatable pool set up in the front yard, the same one that had started so much trouble. They were laughing and splashing, and Jennifer was taking pictures on her phone. "Can you believe all the drama that little pool caused?" she said, sitting down next to me. "It wasn't really about the pool," I said. "It was about Barbara needing to control everything and everyone. The pool just gave her an excuse." "I'm glad you pressed charges," Jennifer said. "I know it was stressful and expensive and took forever, but you did the right thing. She needed to face consequences for what she did." "I just wanted to protect our kids," I said. "That's all any parent wants." Mason ran up to the porch, dripping wet. "Dad, can we keep the pool out here all summer? It's so much funnier in the front yard because we can see everyone." "Sure, buddy," I said, ruffling his wet hair. "Just remember to help me put it away before sunset." "I will." He ran back to the pool, and Lily splashed him immediately, causing another round of giggling. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my beer. The Arizona sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sounds of kids playing and neighbors chatting on their front lawns. This was what life in an HOA community was supposed to be like, people just living their lives, taking care of their homes, and looking out for each other. It shouldn't require lawyers and police and restraining orders. It shouldn't involve someone so obsessed with power that they'd assault children over a dispute about community rules. But sometimes you have to stand up for yourself and your family, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I could have just accepted Barbara's harassment, paid the fines, moved the pool, and tried to stay under her radar. A lot of people probably would have done that. But she crossed a line when she went after my kids, and I wasn't going to let that slide. The legal process had been exhausting and expensive. Even with Sarah's help, we had spent thousands of dollars on lawyer fees and court costs. But it had been worth it. Barbara was gone, the neighborhood was better, and my family was safe. That was all that mattered. Frank walked by with his dog and waved. "Evening, Ethan. Kids having fun, always," I called back. "Good to see," he said. "You know, I've been in this neighborhood 15 years, and this is the happiest I've ever seen it. You did a good thing standing up to Barbara. A lot of us were too scared to do it ourselves." "Someone had to," I said. After Frank continued his walk, Jennifer squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know this whole thing was awful, but you handled it the right way. You didn't stoop to her level. You followed the rules, documented everything, and let the legal system work." "I had a good lawyer," I said. "You had a good case," she corrected. "Barbara was clearly in the wrong, and everyone could see it. That's why the judge came down so hard on her." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the kids play as the sun continued to set. At exactly 7 o'clock, as per HOA guidelines, I got up and started helping Mason and Lily deflate the pool and put it away. But this time, I wasn't doing it out of fear or anxiety. I was doing it because it was a reasonable rule that made sense. Putting away pool toys at night kept the neighborhood looking neat and prevented them from becoming hazards. That was the difference between a good HOA and a bad one. Good rules, fairly enforced, that everyone understood and agreed, made the community better. Not arbitrary enforcement based on personal grudges. Not using regulations as weapons to punish people you didn't like. Over the following months, I stayed active on the HOA board and helped David implement more reforms. We streamlined the violation process, reduced a lot of the more ridiculous rules, and established a community newsletter to keep everyone informed about what the board was doing. We even started having neighborhood BBQs and holiday parties, something that had never happened under Barbara's reign. The community became the kind of place I had imagined when we first moved in: friendly neighbors, well-maintained homes, and a sense of shared responsibility for making the neighborhood a good place to live. Kids played in their yards without fear. People waved to each other. Violations were rare and handled with courtesy rather than hostility. I sometimes wondered if Barbara had learned anything from her experience. Probably not. People like her rarely did. She had been so convinced of her own righteousness, so certain that she was the only thing standing between Pleasant Valley and chaos, that she couldn't see how her behavior was destroying the very thing she claimed to protect. The restraining order was still in effect, and according to the terms of her probation, Barbara had to check in with a probation officer monthly and couldn't leave the Tucson area without permission. Detective Torres had told me that if she violated the order in any way, even something as minor as sending an email or making a phone call, she'd go straight back to jail to serve her suspended sentence. I didn't think she'd be stupid enough to try anything, but I kept my guard up anyway. Our home security system was still active. I had Sarah's number saved in my phone, and I had copies of all the court documents easily accessible, just in case. But as the months passed and we heard nothing from Barbara, I started to truly relax. The nightmare was over. We had survived it. Our family was stronger for it, and the neighborhood was thriving. On a warm Saturday morning in May, almost 2 years after the hose incident, I was in the front yard planting some new flowers with Mason and Lily. They were older now. Mason was 8 and Lily was 6, and they loved helping with yard work. We had chosen flowers from the approved HOA list, but this time it didn't feel like a restriction. The approved flowers were actually quite nice, and choosing from the list took away the stress of trying to figure out what would grow well in the Arizona heat. A moving truck pulled up to Barbara's old house, which had been sitting empty since Richard sold it 9 months earlier. A young couple got out along with 2 little kids about the same age as Mason and Lily. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Ethan O'Connor. I live a few houses down. Welcome to Pleasant Valley." The husband, a guy in his early 30s, shook my hand. "Thanks. I'm Chris Martinez. This is my wife Alina, and these are our kids Sophia and Diego. We're excited to be here. The neighborhood looks great." "It is great," I said honestly. "The HOA is pretty reasonable and the neighbors are friendly. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to stop by." "Actually," Chris said, "the realtor mentioned something about drama with the previous HOA president. He said she got arrested or something." I chose my words carefully. "There was an incident a couple of years ago, yes. The previous president had some personal issues and took things too far. But she's gone now, and the board has completely reformed how things operate. You shouldn't have any problems." "That's good to hear," Alina said. "We were a little worried when we heard about it, but everyone we've talked to says the neighborhood is really nice now." "It is," I assured them. "Really?" As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of closure. The Martinez family was moving into Barbara's old house, filling it with new energy and new memories. The old chapter was truly closed. That night after the kids were in bed, Jennifer and I sat on our back patio under the stars. "Chris and Alina seem nice," she said. "They do," I agreed. "Their kids are the same age as ours. Maybe they'll all become friends." "It's weird to think that 2 years ago we were in the middle of all that craziness with Barbara," Jennifer said. "It feels like a lifetime ago now." "A lot has changed," I said. "We've changed. The neighborhood has changed." "Do you ever regret pressing charges?" she asked. "It was such a huge ordeal." I thought about that for a moment. "No, I don't regret it at all. If I hadn't pressed charges, if we had just accepted her behavior, she would have kept escalating. Who knows what she might have done eventually? And it wasn't just about us. She was making a lot of people miserable. Someone needed to stop her." "You're right," Jennifer said. "I just hate that it had to get so ugly." "Me too. But sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes you have to fight back, even when it's hard and messy and expensive, because the alternative is letting bullies win. We sat there for a while longer, enjoying the peace and quiet of our home. Mason and Lily were sleeping safely in their beds. We had good neighbors, a fair HOA, and a community we were proud to be part of. It had taken a lot of work and a lot of stress to get here, but it had been worth it. The next morning, I helped the Martinez family unload their moving truck. Several other neighbors showed up to help too, and by noon we had all their furniture inside. Alina made sandwiches for everyone, and we all sat in their new living room eating and chatting. "This is amazing," Chris said, looking around at all the neighbors who had come to help. "We weren't expecting this kind of welcome." "That's what community is supposed to be about," David Morrison said. He had stopped by with his wife to welcome the new neighbors and had ended up helping move a couch. "We all look out for each other here." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that hot Saturday afternoon when Barbara had sprayed my kids with her hose. The incident had been traumatic and terrifying at the time, but it had also been a catalyst for positive change. The neighborhood had rallied together to remove a toxic leader, reform the HOA, and create a genuine sense of community. Barbara's trial had made local news, and for a few weeks, we had been semi-famous as that family that got the crazy HOA president arrested. But the attention had faded, and now we were just another family living our lives in Pleasant Valley. The restraining order would remain in effect for another 2 years, and Barbara's probation would last even longer. By the time she was truly free from court supervision, nearly 6 years would have passed since the hose incident. Mason would be almost a teenager, and Lily would be in middle school. Barbara would be in her late 50s, hopefully having learned something from her experience. I never wanted to see her again, and I hope she felt the same way. There was no need for revenge or further conflict. Justice had been served, our family was safe, and the community had moved on. That night, I tucked Mason and Lily into bed and read them a story. When I finished, Lily looked up at me with her big brown eyes and said, "Daddy, I'm glad we live here. I love our house and our neighborhood." "Me too, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "Me too." As I turned off the light and closed their door, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had been through something difficult, but we had come out the other side stronger. We had stood up for ourselves, we had protected our children, and we had helped make our community a better place. That was all anyone could ask for. That was enough. The story of Barbara Hutchins, the HOA president who lost everything because she couldn't control her need for power and control, became a cautionary tale in Pleasant Valley. New residents were told about it as a way of explaining why the current HOA was so reasonable and fair. It was a reminder that rules and regulations should serve the community, not the egos of the people enforcing them. For my family, it was a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and scary, is always worth it. Because at the end of the day, home should be a place where you feel safe and happy, where your kids can play without fear, where you can water your flowers and set up a little pool without worrying about some petty tyrant swooping in to ruin your day. We had fought for that right, and we had won. And every time I saw Mason and Lily playing in our front yard, laughing and happy and free, I knew we had made the right choice. The legal battle had cost us money and time and stress. But it had given us something more valuable in return: peace of mind, a real sense of community, and the knowledge that we had stood up to a bully and prevailed. And that, in the end, was worth everything.